Of course, we're going to spend time in the future. So we're going to buy a car in the future. We're going to buy a house in the future. And we're going to do all those fun things and try to walk through what it would be like. And obviously, it's going to be also a lot of fun looking at the future of ethics and looking at the future of relationships and how, as we interface more and more with artificial intelligence, spend quality time with different algorithms that are going to develop relationship with chatbots, and how is that going to work? Well, I think it was my consulting background that makes me use a lot of frameworks. This AI world is complex, so I wanted to create a few different frameworks so that would help you kind of minimize the complexity. So I created 3 frameworks. The first one is called the Open Your Eyes to AI framework, and that's the first one that we're going to cover. And that one is going to look at AI through a comparison with a smartphone. And the comparison to the smartphone, it helps a lot because people understand hardware, software, operating system, and connectivity to the outside environment. So it basically creates 4 pillars automatically that I can very easily tell you and start building some analogies so that you can always bring it back to the smartphone and keep it simple. We're going to look at AI as hardware, AI as software, AI as an operating system, and AI as a connectivity conduit to the new environment, the internet, cloud, blockchain, etc. So that's the first methodology that we're going to cover. The second methodology that we're going to cover is the AI cube. And the AI cube is a way for you to really figure out the AI stage at which you are. Because now, with the convergence of the emerging technologies and AI, they're getting amplified. Just like when they say that whatever color is the new black, we're gonna do a lot of those. This is the new X, this is the new Y, so that you can continue to create a bridge between the knowledge that you have and the knowledge that you need to have. This AI cube has 3 variables because matrices, a 2x2 matrix, which is what I used to use a lot in consulting, is not gonna cut it with AI. It's a little more complex. So when you get 3 variables, you go into a cube. So it creates 8 sort of mini cubes within the cube, and we're going to cover those 8 spaces. The 3 variables that we're going to cover in the AI cube are AI/data integration within your firm. The second one is going to be emerging technologies integrated into your own firm, and both of them are high or low. And the third one is this sort of a vertical integration of your industry, but we're going to call these value chains because I believe that value chains are the new firm of the future. And we're going to discuss that in detail. So how much you're integrated across your value chain, high or low, is the third variable, and that's going to conform your AI cube. The firms that are low are the existing firms today, and the firms that are going to be high are going to be the next generation leaders of the future. That's why it's important to get into this AI cube. The third framework we're going to study in this course is an implementation framework. AImorphosis is a transformation of your digital business into an AI business. A good friend of mine taught me that if you want to transform yourself personally, you need to have the direction, the knowledge, the tools, and the motivation. Those 4 things are essential to any transformation, and I'm just going to look at it through that lens to make it very simple. So direction, which is vision, knowledge, tools, and motivation. In this case, our direction is going to be the AI vision, and we're going to learn from, there's no right or wrong when looking at the future. So what I did is I'm going to talk about over a dozen different ways to get at the future, different methodologies from different people, because there's no right or wrong answer. You should use them all. You should have an arsenal of techniques that you can pull out from your bag and utilize given any type of situation. Because AI is like a hurricane, all these emerging technologies, AI, blockchain, all this together converging is creating a hurricane type environment. So we need to use hurricane tools for preparedness. The cone of uncertainty is going to be that vision. Preparing for a hurricane basically incorporates, you've seen them 100 times, these cones of uncertainty that they create. All the weather people are trying to figure out where it's going to hit and where it's going to make landfall. It's the same. We don't know where the market's going to hit, where the market's going to make landfall, where consumers are going to be super satisfied, and where EBITDA is going to blossom. And so until we figure out where it's going to make landfall, and obviously the further you go, 5, 10, 15, the more difficult it becomes. So there's a wider cone of uncertainty. Just like if you go 5, 10, 15 days on a hurricane, you really don't know where it's going to go. And that combination of offerings, a little bit more to the right, a little bit more to the left, that's what's going to create the movement of the AI hurricane that's going to be very unpredictable. And that's why we create a cone so that we can at least manage some parameters and start building for a possible future, even if it has a wide breadth of possible impacts. Just because we don't know where it's going to hit doesn't mean we can't prepare for it. That's very important. So we're going to teach you different approaches to look at the future and try to predict it. The second, knowledge, it's really going to come down to data. Data is the blood, data is the gold, data is the money, data is your number 1 asset going forward in the AI era. So we're going to look at how to manage it, how to take care of it. I'm going to try to distill 20 years of data analytics into a few lectures. The idea is to give you just very high level grasp of how data science intersects data visualization and give you hints of where things are going so you can grasp what's going on and you can take this on head on. Even if you don't have a statistics background, and even if you haven't done the MBA, it doesn't matter. As long as you understand the concepts, you'll have the experts help you out, but you need to understand where you're taking the boat. So that's what this course is going to give. We're going to look at visual analytics. The area of visualization has grown so much. You can now jump straight from visualizing the data to getting the insight. It's called visual analytics. It's an incredible field that is blossoming. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about data bias. Our biggest enemy is data bias, and there's bias in all of us. It's mathematically almost impossible not to have bias, but we need to figure out ways to identify it, isolate it, reduce it, mitigate it, and flat out eliminate it. Then we're going to get to the tools. So the tools in this case of a business strategy course, it really is like a Harvard business case studies, and you really need to see examples of industry. And we've been giving you a lot of examples so you get to see what's happening. We created a couple of scenarios where we put you in the shoes of a CEO. So what would you do if you were the CEO facing these types of AI problems coming down the pike? We're also going to give you a number of AI dilemmas for you to chew on and to think about. There's no right or wrong answer, but it helps you start to think about the potential ethical dilemmas and problems that may arise. And then finally, the motivation. And the motivation is just showing you the cost of not doing and not taking action. That's your motivation. So I'm going to show you side by side AI versus industry, what happens when AI takes on an industry and the industry doesn't react. I'm going to show you examples of what's happening with a competitor. So when you have two competitors with roughly the same share and the same type of business and the same clients, and they do tit for tat and they copy each other, all of a sudden one of them gets artificial intelligence. So we're going to discuss those scenarios. That way you can see AI first mover advantage. We talked about it being a lethal blow, but in order to launch an AI strategy, you have to do an assessment of where your competitors are, and always try to figure out ways to put yourself in a position of AI first mover advantage so that you can basically unleash that lethal blow against your competitors before they do it to you. It's going to be interesting to see who makes it, because you and your competitors may pick different areas. They may strike at you with AI during customer service, and you may strike at them with AI in cost savings, back office operations. There's a lot of pieces where you can use AI. Now you have an idea of what's going to happen if you don't do anything and if you don't take action. And then you decide what you want to do. Another motivation, it's just, even though we admire them and we think greatly of them, and the Amazons and the Apples and the Facebooks and the Tencents and the Baidus and the Alibabas, many of them, especially the ones in the US, have many years now. They've become the entrenched leaders. And with that also comes a level of complacency, even with Google. And Google is probably the best player out there in terms of artificial intelligence. Definitely a global leader. And we're going to take on some of its core applications and we're going to make them better. And I actually did it with my students, and I'm going to show you what that looks like and why this day and age, anybody can take on Google and the giants of the tech industry. Anyone. Because technology costs have decreased to a level where you really, if you have a good idea, you can take on the big shops. Innovation and creativity can happen anywhere and through anybody. That's something that you really have to believe. So anybody can take on the big ones, and we will take on some of the biggest ones in this course. That's the third framework, the AImorphosis framework. These three frameworks are going to help us reduce the complexity, create some easy to understand analogies with real world stuff that we know, like the smartphones, and start making all of this world of AI manageable